My name is Robert Miller. I am 70 years old, a retired civil engineer, living in the quiet suburbs of Austin, Texas. For 5 years since my wife Emily passed, the silence in our home has been my loudest companion. My son Ethan says he worries about me being alone. That's why he insists on our weekly Sunday dinners. He says it's for me, but I've learned that when Ethan says something is for me, I should probably check my pockets. Last Sunday, during one of those sterile, obligatory meals, my life took a turn I never saw coming. My neighbor called me, his voice trembling with a primal fear that shot through the phone and seized my own heart. He asked if I was home, and when I said no, he whispered the 5 words that started it all. "Then who is in your house?" Before the panic could even fully register in my chest, before I could even form a response, I heard a sound from across the table that chilled me to the bone. My son, my only child, threw his head back and laughed. It wasn't a laugh of disbelief or comfort. It was the frantic, high-pitched laugh of a man watching his own carefully constructed world begin to burn down around him. And it was the moment I knew my biggest threat wasn't a stranger with a flashlight, but the son I had raised within those very walls. What he didn't know was that he was laughing at an old engineer. And an engineer knows one thing above all else: every structure, no matter how perfect it seems, has a breaking point. And he had just shown me his. The smell of garlic and rosemary attempted to fill the air, a culinary lie meant to create an illusion of family warmth. But it couldn't penetrate the cold, sterile atmosphere of my son Ethan's home. It was a place of polished granite, gleaming stainless steel, and abstract art that held no meaning for me. It felt less like a home and more like a high-end hotel lobby where no one ever truly settled in. I sat at the head of their enormous dining table, a position of honor that felt more like an interrogation seat. This was our Sunday dinner, a ritual Ethan and his wife Olivia had insisted upon after Emily died. They framed it as a kindness, a noble act, to keep their old widowed father from fading into lonely obscurity. But the truth was a sharper, colder thing. I never felt more profoundly alone than when I was surrounded by their performative concern. "More potatoes, Dad?" Olivia asked, her voice a smooth, practiced melody. Her smile was a masterpiece of social engineering, perfectly shaped, but utterly devoid of warmth. It never reached the calculating intelligence in her eyes. "I'm fine, thank you," I replied, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. I prodded the dry piece of chicken on my plate, a sad, flavorless thing that perfectly mirrored the conversation. Ethan, as usual, contributed nothing. He was hunched over his phone, a permanent extension of his hand. His thumb scrolled relentlessly, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of the screen. He was physically present, a body in a chair, but his mind, his entire being, was elsewhere. He was chasing venture capital, networking with people I'd never meet, building a digital empire that seemed to have no foundation in the real world. Now and then, a flicker of emotion would cross his face, a frown of concentration, a brief, tight smile at some unseen victory before he would retreat back into his silent, glowing world. Olivia, a master at filling silences, launched into a detailed monologue about their upcoming vacation to Hawaii. She painted a vivid picture of 5-star resorts, private beaches, and exclusive restaurants. She used the word deserve 4 times. "We just deserve a break," she concluded, finally looking at me as if seeking my validation, my blessing for their extravagance. I simply nodded, the gears in my engineer's brain quietly turning. The numbers didn't add up. The constant talk of financial strain from Ethan, followed by the announcement of yet another luxury expense. It was a dissonant melody I'd been hearing for years. It was in that precise moment of quiet calculation that my old phone buzzed against the table. The sound was abrasive, a low, urgent vibration that cut through Olivia's light chatter. The screen lit up with a name: George, my neighbor. An immediate knot of unease tightened in my stomach. George was a man of few words and even fewer phone calls. A retired Marine, he communicated in short, direct bursts. A call from him at this hour meant something was wrong. I swiped to answer. "Robert here." The sound on the other end was not George's usual gruff greeting. It was the sound of ragged, panicked breathing. "Robert," he managed to get out, his voice laced with a raw urgency that made me sit bolt upright in my chair. "Are you home?" The fear in his voice was contagious. It bypassed all my defenses and went straight to my core. "No, George," I said, my own voice steady despite the sudden pounding in my chest. "I'm at Ethan's. What is it? What's wrong?" The table fell silent. Olivia's smile vanished. Even Ethan, pulled from his digital trance by the sheer gravity in my tone, looked up from his phone, a flicker of annoyance on his face at having his concentration broken. "Then who is in your house?" George whispered, his voice cracking with a mix of fear and confusion. "I swear to God, Robert, I just saw a flashlight beam. It swept right across your living room window. I'm looking right at it from my bedroom." The world seemed to slow down. My blood turned to ice. My house. Emily's house. The place where every memory, every ghost of my life resided. Being invaded. I shot up from my chair, its legs shrieking in protest against the polished tile floor. "Ethan," I said, my voice tight. "I have to go home. Now." I expected a jolt of concern from my son, a shared sense of alarm, an immediate offer to come with me. What I received instead was something so profoundly wrong, so utterly alien, that it stopped me dead in my tracks. Ethan laughed. It wasn't a chuckle of disbelief. It was a loud, sharp barking sound that exploded from his chest. He threw his head back, his throat exposed, and let out a peal of laughter that was utterly unhinged. It was the sound of a spring being wound too tight, and then suddenly snapping. "Dad, relax," he gasped, wiping a phantom tear from his eye, waving a dismissive hand. "It's probably just a reflection from a passing car. Or Mr. Henderson's cat again. You know how George gets. His eyes aren't what they used to be. Sit down. Finish your dinner." Olivia, after a moment of stunned silence, quickly scrambled to reinforce his reality. "He's right, Dad. Let's not get worked up over nothing. I'm sure it's fine." I stood frozen, staring at the man who was my son. The echoes of his laughter seemed to ricochet off the cold surfaces of the room. It wasn't a sound of reassurance. It was a desperate, frantic attempt to invalidate my reality, to dismiss a genuine threat. And beneath the forced mirth, I heard it clearly, now panic. It was the frantic laugh of a liar caught in an unexpected spotlight, desperately trying to change the script. It was too loud, too long, too wrong. In that chilling moment, the fear of a stranger in my house was completely overshadowed by a new, terrifying certainty. The greatest danger to me was not an unknown intruder. It was sitting right in front of me, laughing. The drive home was a blur of red taillights and white headlights. Ethan's hollow laughter echoed in my ears, a cruel soundtrack to my growing fear. By the time I reached my front door, the police were already there. 2 young officers, polite and professional, did a thorough sweep of the house. They found nothing. No broken windows, no forced locks. They were patient, but I could see the conclusion forming in their eyes, a well-meaning but slightly confused old man, a jumpy neighbor, a false alarm. They suggested I get a better lock for my back gate, and left. I stood alone in the entryway of my silent house, the report they left on the table feeling more like a dismissal than a reassurance. But I wasn't confused. I was an engineer. For 45 years, I built bridges structures designed to withstand incredible stress. I understood foundations. I knew that the smallest, most insignificant crack could be a symptom of a catastrophic failure deep within the structure. Ethan's laughter had been a hairline fracture, and I was now certain that the foundation of my family was about to collapse. The next morning, after a sleepless night, I called Ethan and told him what I'd found. The faint scent of a man's expensive cologne, the same kind he wore. The small smudge of reddish mud on the welcome mat inside the back door, a type of clay not found anywhere in my garden. His response was exactly what I had come to expect. Another laugh, this one tinged with annoyance. "Dad, you're really letting your imagination run wild," he said, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "Honestly, I think being alone in that big house is starting to get to you. Olivia and I are worried." That was the moment the grief I felt for my son, for the relationship we'd lost, finally hardened into something else. It became cold, clear, and unyielding. It became resolve. They saw an old man forgetful and paranoid. They were about to be reminded that I was the man who designed the civic center downtown. They had underestimated the structure. My son thought I couldn't operate a smartphone, but he had no idea I'd used complex design software to build virtual models of stress-bearing trusses. That afternoon, I sat at my desk and spent 2 hours researching. I wasn't looking for hearing aids or walk-in bathtubs. I was comparing the specs of discrete Wi-Fi-enabled security cameras. I read reviews, watched installation tutorials, and compared night vision capabilities. I found a set of 4 small cameras easily hidden that fed directly to an encrypted app on my phone. I paid for them with my own credit card and selected next-day delivery. Clicking the Confirm Purchase button felt like loading the first bullet into a rifle. It was a grim but deeply satisfying feeling. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next strange event. I was taking back control of my own territory, 1 square inch at a time. My house was no longer just a home. It was a work site, and I was its chief engineer. 3 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't seen in years, Mark Peterson. We had worked together at the firm for over 2 decades. He was the head of the geotechnical division, a man who could tell you the entire geological history of a place just by looking at a handful of dirt. He was the best there was. I answered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's Robert. Robert Miller," he boomed on the other end, his voice exactly as I remembered it, full of energy and good humor. "I was surprised to get a call from your number. Even more surprised to get a soil sample delivered by courier. I thought you were supposed to be enjoying retirement, not playing in the mud." I offered a weak laugh. "Something like that. Did you get a chance to look at it?" There was a pause, and the cheerful tone in his voice shifted, becoming more clinical, more serious. "Yeah, I did. It was an interesting sample, Robert. At first glance, it's just a standard reddish clay common to this part of Texas. But we put it under the microscope, ran a few tests. This isn't just mud from someone's boot." I leaned forward in my chair, gripping the phone tighter. "What is it?" "It's processed bentonite clay," Mark said. The words meant little to me on their own. He must have sensed my confusion. "Think of it this way, Robert. This is not something you just find lying around in a garden or on a hiking trail. This clay has been commercially processed. It has additives mixed in. We use this specific grade for 2 main things in our line of work: drilling exploratory boreholes, or more commonly for structural foundation assessments. It's used to seal cracks or test the stability of a concrete slab." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Every word he spoke was a hammer blow shattering my previous assumptions. A burglar doesn't bring specialized industrial clay into a house. A random trespasser doesn't have shoes caked in foundation sealant. The image in my head shifted from a shadowy figure looking for jewelry to a professional in a hard hat, someone with a clipboard and a purpose. The person in my house wasn't there to take something. They were there to evaluate something. They were inspecting my foundation, my home. A cold dread far deeper and more terrifying than the fear of a simple break-in settled over me. This wasn't random. This was calculated. And the only person who had ever shown an obsessive interest in the structural and monetary value of my house was my son, Ethan. After the call with Mark, I sat in my study for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in on me. Processed bentonite clay. Foundation assessments. The words circled in my mind, cold and sharp. An engineer had been in my house. Not a thief. An engineer. My gaze fell upon the old steel filing cabinet in the corner, a relic from my working days. Emily used to joke that I filed away everything from birthday cards to grocery receipts. For the first time in years, I was grateful for my meticulous habits. I pulled open the heavy top drawer. The scent of old paper and ink filled the air, the smell of a lifetime of records. I bypassed the folders for taxes and old car titles, my fingers searching for the one labeled property. Inside was a thick manila folder, heavy with the history of the house. I pulled out the original deed, the paper crisp and official, with my name and Emily's side by side. Seeing her signature so full of life and optimism was a punch to the gut. We had poured everything we had into this place. It was our fortress, our legacy. I then found the thick stack of mortgage documents from 40 years ago. I remembered the day we signed them, feeling the immense weight of the debt we were taking on a 30-year loan that seemed like an eternity. I sifted through the payment stubs and yearly statements until I found the one I was looking for. A letter from the bank dated 15 years ago. It was a single beautiful page. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Miller," it read. "Your mortgage has been paid in full." We owned it. Outright. No debts, no liens. Just the two of us and the home we had built. Curiosity gnawed at me. I turned to my computer and typed our address into the county's public property database. The screen refreshed, and a number stared back at me. Estimated market value, $1.2 million. A wave of dizziness washed over me. $1.2 million. It wasn't just a house, it was a fortune, a prize, a motive. For years, Ethan had been talking about me selling the house, framing it as a way for me to have a more comfortable, worry-free retirement. I always thought it was misguided concern. Now seeing that number, his suggestions felt sinister, like a predator circling its prey, patiently waiting for the right moment to strike. As I sat there bathed in the cold glow of the monitor, the number $1.2 million pulsed on the screen. It wasn't just a number. It was a motive. It was the answer to a question I hadn't even dared to ask myself. The pain that followed was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. It wasn't the anger of being cheated or the fear of losing my home. It was the hollow, aching grief of betrayal. This wasn't a stranger. This was Ethan, my son. The boy I taught to ride a bike, the young man whose college tuition I paid without a second thought. I saw his face in my mind, not as the slick, distant man he had become, but as the 5-year-old who used to hold my hand, his small fingers wrapped tightly around mine, trusting me completely. Where had that boy gone? How had the love in his heart curdled into this cold, calculating greed? For a few moments, I allowed the sorrow to wash over me. I grieved for my son, for the man he failed to become. I grieved for Emily, and I was glad, so deeply glad, that she was not here to see this. This would have broken her heart into a million pieces. But then something shifted inside me. The engineer, the man I had been for 45 years, began to stir. He was an old, familiar part of me, a part that had been dormant since retirement. He looked at the flood of grief and saw it for what it was, an inefficient, unproductive variable. Grief wouldn't solve the problem. Emotions were like unstable soil. You couldn't build anything on them. What was needed now was data, logic, a plan. The pain didn't vanish. It simply changed form. It cooled, hardened, and was forged into something else entirely. Resolve. A cold, clear, unshakable resolve. I was no longer a confused old man hurt by his son's coldness. I was a structural engineer who had just discovered a critical flaw in a project. My family was the structure, and Ethan was the point of failure. The gaslighting, the fake concern, the laughter, it was all just noise designed to distract me from the data. The data was the bentonite clay. The data was the $1.2 million. The data was the unauthorized inspection of my foundation. My objective was no longer to understand my son's heart. My objective was to understand his plan, to analyze it piece by piece, and then, when I had all the variables, to dismantle it completely. I closed the laptop. The grieving father was gone. In his place sat an engineer with a blueprint to draw and a demolition to plan. With the grim knowledge of the bentonite clay and the $1.2 million motive solidifying in my mind, I knew my next step had to be a full financial audit. A plan like the one I suspected Ethan was hatching would require access to my money. It would leave a trace, a discrepancy, a single number out of place that would unravel the entire scheme. An engineer knows that you can't build something without leaving behind a blueprint. I was determined to find it. I started with the most obvious place, my primary checking and savings accounts at the local bank. My hands were steady as I typed in my credentials, the familiar interface loading onto the screen. I began my review with the meticulous patience of a man who used to check thousands of lines of code for a single error. I examined the checking account first. My monthly pension deposit had arrived on the 5th, as it always did. The amount was correct to the penny. I scanned the withdrawals, property taxes, the electricity bill, the weekly grocery. Run a new set of gardening tools from the hardware store. Every transaction was mine. Every debit was accounted for. There were no strange wire transfers to offshore accounts, no large, unexplained cash withdrawals. It was a perfect, boring portrait of a retiree's quiet life. I moved to the savings account. The balance was healthy, untouched for months, slowly accumulating a pittance of interest. Again, nothing. Not a single red flag. Next, I logged into my retirement portfolio, the nest egg that Emily and I had so carefully built over 40 years of diligent saving and sensible investing. My heart beat a little faster. This was the big one. This was where the real money was. If Ethan was in financial trouble, this would be the treasure chest he'd try to plunder. The page loaded, displaying a series of charts and graphs. The market had been steady. My portfolio, a conservative mix of bonds and blue-chip stocks, reflected that stability. The balance was exactly where it should be, having grown modestly over the last quarter. I clicked through to the transaction history, my eyes scanning for any sign of liquidation or transfer. Nothing. No stocks had been sold. No funds had been moved. It was all there, secure and untouched. For a brief, dizzying moment, a wave of self-doubt washed over me. Could Ethan have been right? Was I just an old man alone in a big house, letting my imagination get the better of me? Was I concocting a grand conspiracy out of a strange laugh and a bit of mud on a welcome mat? The financial data, the hard, indisputable numbers, told a story of absolute normalcy. There was no evidence of foul play. The blueprint I was looking for simply wasn't there. I leaned back in my chair, the logical, data-driven part of my brain at war with the instinctual, gut-level certainty that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. An engineer trusts data above all else, but a man who had been married for 45 years also learns to trust his intuition. The numbers were clean, yes, but they only showed the surface. They showed the accounts I knew I had. A chilling thought began to form in my mind. What about the accounts I didn't know I had? The numbers on the screen were telling me I was safe, but my gut was screaming that the real danger was lurking just beneath the surface, in the one place I hadn't yet thought to look. The clean financial slate in my known accounts did little to soothe the deep instinctual alarm ringing in my gut. My bank accounts and investments were the visible parts of the structure, the load-bearing walls and beams that I checked every day. But what if the damage wasn't in the walls? What if it was in the wiring, the plumbing, the hidden infrastructure that you only check when something goes terribly wrong? There was one last place to look, a financial record that encompasses everything, both seen and unseen, my credit report. I had always taken immense pride in my credit score. It was a reflection of a lifetime of fiscal responsibility, of promises made and promises kept. For decades, it had hovered in the excellent range, a solid, dependable number. Checking it felt like a formality, a final box to tick on my due diligence checklist, before I could either confirm my fears or hopefully dismiss them as the paranoid ramblings of an old man. I navigated to one of the major credit bureau websites, a place I hadn't visited in years. I typed in my personal information, my name, my address, my social security number. The website asked me a series of security questions to verify my identity. Which of the following addresses have you been associated with? Which of these phone numbers has been yours? The questions were mundane, but in my heightened state of anxiety, they felt like an interrogation. After successfully navigating the digital security maze, a message appeared: "Your credit report is now available." I took a deep breath like a diver preparing to plunge into the cold, dark water and clicked the button. The page loaded. At the very top, in a large, bold font, was my credit score. The number that stared back at me made the air leave my lungs in a single painful rush. It wasn't the number I expected. It wasn't anywhere close. My once pristine score, the number that had been a source of quiet pride for my entire adult life, had plummeted. It had dropped nearly 200 points. It was a catastrophic collapse, the financial equivalent of a sinkhole opening up beneath my house. I felt a wave of nausea. A score like this didn't just happen. It was the result of a major negative event, a bankruptcy, a foreclosure, a massive default, none of which I had done. My hands trembled as I used the mouse to scroll down past the summary and into the details of the report. I scanned past my existing credit cards, all listed as paid on time. I scrolled past my closed mortgage account marked as paid in full. And everything looked normal, pristine, even which only made the collapsed score more terrifyingly inexplicable. And then I saw it. A new section under the heading, Installment Loans. My blood ran cold. There was only one entry. It was an account I had never seen before, opened just 6 months ago. The lender's name was unfamiliar, cold and corporate: Titan Financial Solutions. The original loan amount made me gasp. $750,000. And the worst part, the detail that felt like a physical blow, was the collateral listed for this massive unauthorized loan. It was my address, my home, my fortress. Someone had taken out a $750,000 mortgage on my fully paid off house right under my nose. And beneath the lender's name was another detail, a single line of text that connected the crime directly to my heart. Listed as the loan officer, the broker who had arranged the entire fraudulent transaction, was a name I knew all too well: Ethan Miller. The screen in front of me was a tapestry of financial ruin, and every thread was woven by my son. $750,000. Titan Financial Solutions. Ethan Miller, loan officer. The words were clinical, detached, but they hit me with the force of a physical assault. My first instinct was pure, primal denial. It had to be a mistake, a clerical error, a case of mistaken identity. There must be another Robert Miller in Austin, another man with a son named Ethan, who was a financial predator. But the report had my social security number, my date of birth, my entire life history laid bare. There was no mistake. This was me. This was him. My mind, trained for decades to find logical solutions to structural problems, scrambled for a foothold. I needed more data. I needed to see the blueprint of this destruction. On the credit report next to the loan details was a small, clickable link: View Loan Documents. My hand was so unsteady that it took me 3 attempts to position the cursor over the hyperlink. I clicked. A new window opened, a portal to the corporate underbelly of Titan Financial. It asked for a loan reference number, which I copied and pasted from the report. After another security check, a link to a PDF file appeared. The document was titled Mortgage Agreement, Miller Robert. The file size was large, dozens of pages of dense legal jargon. I clicked Download, and a small progress bar appeared at the bottom of my screen. As the blue line slowly crept from left to right, each percentage point felt like a drop of poison being administered into my veins. 10%, 20%. I found myself holding my breath, staring at the screen, caught in a state of suspended animation between hope and horror. A part of me prayed for the download to fail, for a server error to occur, for anything that would keep the truth from fully materializing on my screen. But the bar continued its relentless crawl. 50%, 70%. The truth was coming, and I was powerless to stop it. When the download finally completed, the file opened automatically. The first page was dominated by the aggressive angular logo of Titan Financial Solutions. It looked like the insignia of a hostile alien empire. I scrolled down, my eyes glazing over the endless paragraphs of legalese, the clauses and subclauses that were designed to confuse and overwhelm. I wasn't looking for legal understanding. I was looking for one thing, and one thing only. I scrolled faster and faster, the pages blurring together, until I found it. The final page, the signature page. And there it was. My name written in a confident flowing script at the bottom of the page. Robert Miller. It was a near-perfect replica of my signature. The slant was right, the loops were correct. It was the signature of a man who had signed thousands of blueprints, contracts, and checks over a lifetime. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of forgery. But it was wrong. I knew it in the same way I knew the feel of my own skin. The pressure on the R was too heavy. The cross on the T was a fraction of an inch too low. It was a ghost of my signature, a soulless imitation created by a hand that was not my own. Seeing it felt like a profound violation, as if someone had not just stolen my money, but had stolen a piece of my identity, my very name, and used it to commit a crime against me. The pain of that violation was sharp, but it was nothing compared to what I saw next. I forced my eyes to scan the rest of the page, and I found him. On the line designated for the broker of record was a signature I also knew, but this one was real. A confident, arrogant scrawl that I had seen on birthday cards and thank you notes for years. Ethan Miller. He hadn't even bothered to hide it. His name was right there in black and white, the architect of my ruin proudly signing his work. In that moment, everything clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. The laughter at the dinner table wasn't just panic. It was the sound of a man gloating over a secret he thought was safe. The constant talk of his business being on the verge of a breakthrough wasn't optimism. It was the lie he told himself and the world while he was spending my future. The bentonite clay wasn't for a simple inspection. It was part of the formal appraisal process required by the lender, a step he had personally overseen. The gaslighting, the feigned concern for my mental state, it was all a smokescreen, a calculated campaign to discredit me in advance just in case I ever started asking the right questions. The rage I expected to feel never came. The fire of anger was instantly extinguished by an ocean of icy grief. This wasn't a betrayal. A betrayal is when someone you love hurts you. This was something else. This was an act of a stranger. The person who did this, the cold, methodical predator who forged my name and sold my security for cash, was not my son. My son, the little boy who loved building model airplanes with me, the teenager I taught how to drive, was gone. He had died somewhere along the way, and this stranger had taken his place. I wasn't looking at a contract. I was looking at a death certificate. The death of my son signed by his own hand. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the screen. The forged signature, the damning contract. My son's name, and it all blurred into an abstract painting of betrayal. The silence in my study was absolute, a vacuum, where all the love and trust I had for my son used to be. My body felt heavy, ancient, as if the last 10 minutes had aged me more than the last 10 years. But then a new feeling began to push through the cold fog of grief. It was a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. The engineer in me took over, overriding the grieving father. This was no longer a family drama. This was a crime scene. And I was not just the victim. I was the primary witness. I needed to report it. My hands shook so violently I could barely control them as I fumbled for my phone. I swiped past family photos, my thumb smearing across Ethan's smiling face until I found my contacts. My finger hovered over the name Evelyn Reed. She had handled the closing on our house 40 years ago, and later helped us draft our wills. She was sharp, no nonsense, and the only person I could think of who could possibly navigate this nightmare. I pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, each ring an eternity. I prayed she would answer. I didn't know if I could survive leaving a voicemail. Evelyn Reed. Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, crisp, professional, and utterly calm. It was the voice of a woman who was not easily rattled. Evelyn. I gasped my own voice, a stranger's, a cracked and desperate whisper. It's Robert Miller. There was a brief pause. Robert, it's been a while. Is everything all right? No. I said the word catching in my throat. No, nothing is all right. Evelyn, I need your help. Something has happened. Something terrible. I tried to explain, but the words tumbled out in a chaotic, panicked rush, a jumble of credit scores, forged signatures, and $750,000 loans. I was making no sense, a panicked old man babbling down the phone line. Robert, slow down, she said, her voice cutting through my panic with surgical precision. I can't understand you. Take a breath. Now tell me from the beginning. What did you find? Her calm was an anchor. I took a ragged breath and forced myself to speak like an engineer presenting the data. My house, I said, my voice steadier now. Someone took out a mortgage on my house. A fraudulent mortgage. They forged my signature. The line was silent for a moment. When she spoke again, all traces of pleasantry were gone. Her voice was pure steel. Robert, she said, I need you to email me everything you have. The credit report, the loan agreement, everything. Do not speak to your son. Do not speak to anyone. Send me the documents, and I will call you back within the hour. The call ended. I was alone again, in the silence, but something had changed. I had made a move. I had activated a defense. And for the first time since I saw that forged signature, I felt the faintest glimmer of something other than despair. I felt the first cold spark of the fight to come. True to her word, my phone rang exactly 47 minutes later. The caller ID simply said, E. Reed Law. I answered on the first ring, my hand clenched into a fist. Robert, I said, my voice hoarse. Robert, I've reviewed the documents you sent over. Evelyn began, her voice devoid of any emotion. It was the calm, steady voice of a surgeon about to describe a complex and dangerous procedure. I'm not going to waste your time with platitudes. This is as bad as it looks. In fact, it's worse. I sank down into my desk chair, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. Worse? How can it possibly be worse than a $750,000 fraudulent loan? Because the loan is just a symptom, Robert. It's the end result of the disease, not the disease itself. She explained, her words precise and sharp. A forged signature on a mortgage is a serious crime, yes. But for a lender like Titan Financial to even consider an application of this magnitude, especially with the property held free and clear by a 70-year-old man, they would need more than just a signature. They would need ironclad legal authority to act on your behalf. A simple forgery wouldn't pass their initial risk assessment. I was confused. I don't understand. What are you saying? I'm saying that in order to pull this off, your son couldn't have just faked your signature on the loan document itself. That's amateur hour. To get through the front door of a lender like Titan, he would have had to present them with a document that gave him total, unrestricted control over your financial affairs. He would have needed to legally become you for all intents and purposes. A cold dread began to seep into the room, a dread that was somehow even colder than what I had felt before. What kind of document? A durable power of attorney, Robert, Evelyn said, and the legal term spoken in her clinical tone sounded like a death sentence. A comprehensive one. It's a legal instrument that grants one person, the agent, the authority to manage the financial and legal affairs of another, the principal. With a valid power of attorney, your son wouldn't need to forge your signature on the mortgage. He could sign it himself legally, as you. He could open and close bank accounts in your name, sell your stocks, sell your car, even sell this very house out from under you, and it would all be perfectly legal on the surface. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. The crime I had imagined was a simple, brutal smash and grab. The crime Evelyn was describing was infinitely more sinister. It was a complete and total hijacking of my life, my identity. It required a level of premeditation and cold-blooded calculation that I simply could not fathom. But I never signed anything like that. I stammered, my mind racing, trying to find a flaw in her logic. I would remember signing a document that powerful. I would never. Evelyn's voice was gentle but firm, cutting through my denial. Are you sure, Robert? Think back. The last 6 months, a year. Did Ethan ever bring you any papers to sign? Anything at all? He might have disguised it. Called it something else. An update to your will, a change to your trust, a new healthcare directive. He would have buried it in a stack of other more innocent-looking documents. He would have relied on your trust, on the fact that a father doesn't expect his son to be planning his financial execution. Robert, I need you to think very, very carefully. Did you sign anything? Evelyn's question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Did you sign anything, Robert? No. I said, the denial immediate and forceful. Absolutely not. A power of attorney. Evelyn, I'm a retired engineer, not a fool. I know what that document means. It's giving someone the keys to your entire life. I would never sign something like that. I would remember. My voice was firm, but a tiny cold seed of doubt had been planted. I was trying to convince myself as much as I was trying to convince her. I'm not suggesting you were a fool, Robert, she said, her voice softening slightly, but losing none of its precision. I'm suggesting you were a father, a trusting father. Think back. It wouldn't have been a grand ceremony in a lawyer's office. It would have been casual. He would have chosen a moment when your guard was down. Over a cup of coffee, perhaps. At your kitchen table. Her words, at your kitchen table. They were like a key turning in a long-forgotten rusted lock. The world around me dissolved. The study, the phone in my hand, Evelyn's voice, it all faded away, replaced by a memory so vivid, so seemingly innocent, that my mind had buried it under a layer of trust. It was a Tuesday afternoon about 6 months ago. A beautiful, sunny, unremarkable day. I was in the garden pruning Emily's rose bushes when Ethan's expensive car pulled into my driveway. It was a surprise visit. He usually only came for the obligatory Sunday dinners. He stepped out of the car, beaming, holding a white paper box from my favorite local bakery. Figured you could use a coffee break, Dad, he'd said, his smile wide and disarming. It was the old Ethan, the charming, thoughtful son I missed so dearly. My heart swelled with a foolish paternal pride. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Emily and I had shared thousands of meals. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. We drank coffee and ate pastries, and for a while it felt normal. It felt like we were family again. Then, after the small talk had dwindled, he placed a thick manila folder on the table. Dad! He began, his tone shifting to one of serious filial responsibility. I've been talking with my financial advisor, and he was saying, we really need to get our estate planning in order. You know, just to make sure everything is buttoned up. To protect your assets, and to make things easier down the road, so there are no complications. It all sounded so logical, so responsible. He was being the man I always hoped he would be, forward-thinking, organized, taking care of the family. He opened the folder, revealing a stack of documents at least an inch thick. It's mostly just standard updates to your will and the trust we set up years ago. He explained, his voice a smooth, reassuring murmur. Lawyers just make everything so complicated. It's mostly boilerplate legal stuff. He slid the stack of papers in front of me along with a pen. I've marked all the places you need to sign. It shouldn't take more than a few minutes. He started flipping through the pages, pointing to yellow sticky tabs with little arrows pointing to the signature lines. He kept up a steady stream of chatter as he did it, talking about a new tech conference he was attending, asking about my garden, distracting me. Page after page, I signed my name without reading a single word. I was signing a document about my legacy, about the future of my family, and all I could feel was a profound sense of love and trust for the son who was taking such good care of me. We got to a page in the middle of the stack. It looked different with denser text and the words "durable power of attorney" at the top in bold letters. I paused for a fraction of a second, a flicker of engineer's caution. Ethan must have seen it. "Oh, that one," he said, laughing it off. "That's just a standard medical and financial directive. The lawyer said it's boilerplate for anyone over 65. It just lets me handle your bills and talk to your doctors if, God forbid, you ever have a fall or something and can't do it yourself. It's just a safety net, Dad. A standard part of the package." A safety net. He called it a safety net. And I, in my blind, foolish trust, believed him. I picked up the pen and signed the most important, most dangerous document of my life as if I were signing a birthday card. After the last page was signed, he gathered the documents, his movements quick and efficient. He tapped the stack on the table, aligning the edges perfectly. He looked up at me and he smiled. I see that smile so clearly now in my memory, and it chills me to the core. It wasn't the smile of a grateful son. It wasn't a smile of relief that a tedious task was complete. It was the triumphant, predatory smile of a hunter standing over his kill. It was the smile of a con man who had just successfully fleeced his mark. And his mark was his own father. The memory ended, and I was back in my study, the phone pressed hard against my ear. I was breathless, my heart pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. The room felt cold, and I was shaking. "Robert, Robert, are you there?" Evelyn's voice was a distant echo. I took a ragged, shuddering breath. The final piece of the puzzle had just slammed into place, and the picture it completed was monstrous. "Yes," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Yes, I'm here." "Robert, what is it?" "I signed it." I said the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He brought pastries to my kitchen table, and I signed it. After I finished recounting the memory of the kitchen table, the pastries, and the pen, the silence on the other end of the line was heavy. I could almost hear the gears turning in Evelyn Reed's formidable mind. When she finally spoke, her voice was stripped of all warmth, leaving only the cold, hard glint of steel. "All right, Robert," she said. "The bad news is that our situation is exactly as we feared. He has a legally executed power of attorney, which he obtained through fraudulent means. The good news is that he thinks you are an oblivious old man, and that is the single greatest weapon we have in our arsenal." I was confused. "A weapon, Evelyn? He has total control of my life. How is his perception of me a weapon?" "Because he's arrogant, Robert," she stated as if it were a self-evident truth. "He believes he has won. He thinks you are a non-player character in your own life, a problem to be managed until he can liquidate your assets. As long as he believes that he will be careless, he will leave a trail. Our entire strategy depends on you maintaining that illusion. This is the most important part, Robert, so listen to me very carefully. You cannot confront him. You cannot show a single sign that you know anything. The emotional satisfaction of yelling at him would be immense, I know. But it would be a catastrophic mistake. It would warn him, and he would immediately start covering his tracks, destroying evidence, and preparing his legal defenses." Her words were a bucket of ice water. "What do I do then?" "You do exactly what you have been doing," she instructed, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You will continue to be the slightly confused, lonely father. This Sunday, when he invites you to dinner, you will go. You will sit at his table, eat his food, and you will make small talk about the weather and your garden. You will play the part of the victim, all while we are preparing to turn the tables on him completely. Your job is to be the perfect actor, My job is to be the perfect hunter. I will start digging into Titan Financial. I will investigate the notary who witnessed that document. I will gather every piece of evidence we need. You just need to buy me time and maintain the element of surprise. Can you do that for me, Robert? Can you go to dinner with the man who is trying to destroy you and act as if nothing is wrong? Walking up the stone pathway to Ethan and Olivia's front door felt like an entirely new and terrifying experience. Just a week ago, this had been a routine, a slightly tedious but familiar part of my life. Now it felt like I was an undercover agent walking into the enemy's headquarters. Every part of me screamed to turn around to get in my car and drive away and never come back. But Evelyn's voice was a firm, steady presence in my mind. Your job is to be the perfect actor. So I took a deep breath, arranged my face into a mask of pleasant paternal dotage, and rang the doorbell. Olivia opened the door, her smile as bright and artificial as the silk flowers in her foyer. Dad? You made it, she chirped, kissing the air beside my cheek. The scent of her expensive perfume was cloying. Ethan's just finishing up a work call. Come on in. I stepped inside my shoes, silent on the polished marble floor. The house, once just a symbol of my son's success, now felt like a crime scene. I saw everything through a new lens. The abstract painting on the wall, the designer furniture, the state-of-the-art kitchen, it was all bought with my life, with my security, with the home I had shared with my wife. At the dinner table, the performance began. I was no longer Robert Miller, retired engineer. I was a character. The slightly confused, lonely old father. I asked about the weather. I commented on how nice the table looked. I forced myself to eat the food they served, each bite tasting like ash and betrayal in my mouth. Ethan finally joined us, looking pleased with himself. Sorry about that, Dad, he said, loosening his tie. Just closed a preliminary deal. Big things are happening. He smiled, and I had to physically grip the fork in my hand to keep from recoiling. It was the same smile I had seen in my memory, the smile of the hunter. The dinner was a masterclass in their arrogance. They talked, and I listened, my mind a cold, silent recorder logging every lie, every boast. Olivia was the first to perform. "Oh, Dad, you haven't seen my new baby yet, have you?" she said, her eyes sparkling with materialistic glee. "Ethan surprised me with it last week." She went on to describe her new German SUV in painstaking detail, the buttery leather seats, the panoramic sunroof, the advanced sound system. "It was an extravagant gift, of course," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand, but Ethan insisted. He said my old car just wasn't safe enough anymore. I nodded and forced a smile, all while my mind was screaming. That's not a gift from your husband. That's a gift from me. You're driving my peace of mind around town. Ethan then took center stage, launching into a long, jargon-filled monologue about his company. He used words like synergy, disruption, and leveraging assets. He painted a picture of himself as a visionary CEO on the brink of a massive success that would change the industry. "The next 6 months are going to be critical," he said, looking at me with an unnerving intensity. "It's all about having the liquidity to make bold moves. You can't make money without spending money, Dad. It's a concept your generation never really understood." That was the moment I almost broke. The sheer, unmitigated gall of him lecturing me on financial matters while he was actively siphoning away my life's savings. The urge to stand up, to throw my plate against the wall and scream the truth in his smug, handsome face was so powerful it made my vision swim. I could feel the blood pounding in my temples. But then I saw Emily's face in my mind. I saw our home. And I remembered Evelyn's instructions. I took a slow, deliberate sip of water, the cold liquid a shock to my system, and forced myself to nod. "It all sounds very impressive, son," I said, and I was horrified at how convincing, how utterly pathetic I sounded. Leaving their house an hour later felt like escaping a burning building. I managed to keep the mask in place until I was safely inside my own car, out of their sight. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, the facade crumbling away to reveal the raw, wounded man beneath. The dinner had been hell. But it had also been a success. They had no idea. They saw me as a harmless old man, a relic to be managed, and that was exactly where I needed them to be. As I sat at that dinner table, a strange sense of detachment washed over me. The initial raw pain of the betrayal had receded, replaced by a chilling clarity. I looked at Ethan as he spoke, his hands gesturing to emphasize a point about his business. I saw the expensive Swiss watch on his wrist, a flash of gold and steel. I looked at Olivia as she laughed at one of his jokes, her diamond earrings catching the light. I saw them, but I didn't see my son and my daughter-in-law anymore. The emotional connection that had bound me to them for years had been irrevocably severed. I was looking at two strangers. They were strangers who happened to have my son's face and my daughter-in-law's voice. They were strangers who had sat at my table, accepted my love, and then with cold and calculated precision had plunged a knife into my back. Every luxury they enjoyed, every expensive item they flaunted, was paid for with a piece of my life. The watch on his wrist was a portion of the roof over my head. The earrings she wore were the memories I had built with my wife. They weren't just spending money. They were spending my security, my past, and my future. In their eyes, I was no longer a person. I was an asset to be liquidated, a resource to be drained. And as I looked back at them nodding and smiling my pathetic, rehearsed smile, I realized they had become the same to me. They were no longer my family. They were a structural problem, a threat to my foundation, and I would deal with them with the same cold, methodical precision they had used on me. The love was gone. All that was left was the math. While I was playing the part of the oblivious father, Evelyn Reed was going to war. She operated from her quiet, book-lined office downtown, but her actions were swift, precise, and devastating. She was a general commanding a multi-front assault, and I was her protected civilian kept safely behind the lines while she dismantled the enemy's infrastructure piece by piece. She updated me daily with brief factual phone calls, each one a report from the battlefield. Her first target was the weak link in the chain of legitimacy, the notary public. The power of attorney. The legal weapon Ethan had used against me had been notarized by a woman named Brenda Little. Evelyn didn't just call her. She dispatched a private investigator, a former detective with tired eyes and a relentless methodology. The investigator discovered that Brenda Little was not just a random notary. She was Olivia's best friend from college and the maid of honor at their wedding. They had lunch together twice a month. This wasn't an impartial officer of the court. This was an accomplice. The investigator's report included photographs of Olivia and Brenda together, social media posts, and a sworn affidavit from a disgruntled former employee of the notary office who claimed Brenda was known for bending the rules for friends. With this, the foundation of the power of attorney began to crumble. It was no longer a solid legal document. It was a conspiracy. Simultaneously, Evelyn turned her attention to Ethan's business. While Ethan had been boasting about closing deals and disrupting the market, Evelyn was filing an emergency subpoena for the financial records of his company, Miller Innovations, LLC. She argued to a judge that as a potential victim of fraud perpetrated by the company's CEO, I had a right to see where my money had gone. The judge agreed. The documents that arrived at Evelyn's office were not the glossy projections of a thriving tech startup. They were the frantic, desperate records of a business in a death spiral. They showed massive debt-failed product launches and a burn rate that was consuming cash at an astonishing pace. And threaded throughout the financial chaos was the clear, damning evidence of the $750,000 loan from Titan Financial. The money hadn't been invested in the company. It had been systematically drained, funneled into personal accounts to pay for Olivia's new SUV, a down payment on a vacation home in Aspen, and to cover massive credit card bills filled with charges from luxury retailers and five-star restaurants. The business wasn't a business. It was a laundromat for my life savings. Her final and most audacious move was aimed directly at the heart of the beast Titan Financial. She didn't send a polite letter of inquiry. She sent a formal notice of pending litigation. It was a legal broadside, a declaration of war. The notice, which she forwarded to me, was a masterpiece of controlled aggression. It laid out the facts with chilling clarity: the fraudulent power of attorney, the complicit notary, the clear evidence of elder financial abuse. It accused Titan Financial of predatory lending and gross negligence, stating that their failure to perform basic due diligence on a loan of this size to a man of my age and financial profile was not just an oversight, but a willful disregard for the law. It informed them that we were in possession of evidence that would not only make them liable for the full amount of the fraudulent loan, but would also open them up to massive punitive damages and a potentially career-ending investigation by state and federal financial regulators. She concluded the letter by stating that we were offering them a single time-sensitive opportunity to mitigate their damages by attending a meeting at her office. The letter didn't ask, it commanded. With these three maneuvers, Evelyn had done more than just gather evidence. She had systematically dismantled Ethan's entire support structure. She had invalidated his legal authority, exposed his financial desperation, and cornered his financial backers. He was no longer a confident predator in control of the situation. He was an isolated, exposed fraud, and he didn't even know it yet. The trap was set. All that was left was to invite the prey to the slaughter. The day before the scheduled meeting, Evelyn called me. Her voice was calm, but beneath it I could sense the controlled energy of a chess master preparing for the final moves of a game. "Robert," she began, "I want to walk you through the strategy for tomorrow, so you understand exactly why we are doing what we are doing. I know your instinct is to go after Ethan. It's personal, it's emotional, and you want justice from the person who betrayed you. I understand that, but we are not going to sue your son." I was stunned. "What, Evelyn, why not?" "He's the one who did this. He's the criminal." "He is," she agreed, her voice firm. "But in a situation like this, you don't attack the soldier. You attack his supply lines. Suing Ethan directly would be a mistake for several reasons. First, it would be a long, ugly, and public family battle. It would drag on for years, costing you a fortune in legal fees and an immeasurable amount in emotional distress. Second, and this is the most critical part, Ethan is broke. The financial records from his company prove it. He's been living on fumes and credit. Even if we sued him and won a multi-million-dollar judgment, it would be worthless. It's a piece of paper. You can't get blood from a stone, Robert. It would be a moral victory, perhaps, but a complete financial loss." Her logic was cold, brutal, and undeniably correct. I had been so focused on the betrayal that I hadn't considered the practical reality of the aftermath. "So what's the alternative?" I asked, my voice heavy. "The alternative," she said, and I could hear a subtle shift in her tone, the sound of a predator closing in, "is that we ignore the puppet and we go directly after the puppet masters, or in this case, the grossly negligent corporations that enabled him. We are not suing Ethan. We are suing Titan Financial for predatory lending and the notary's office for professional malpractice and complicity to fraud." It was a brilliant strategic pivot. I felt a surge of adrenaline, the engineer in me instantly recognizing the genius of her design. "Why is that a better approach?" I asked, already knowing the answer, but wanting to hear her articulate it. "Because unlike your son, they have everything to lose," she explained. "Titan Financial is a multi-million-dollar lender. They have deep pockets. They also have a corporate reputation to protect and are subject to a mountain of state and federal banking regulations. The evidence we have of their negligence of them approving a massive loan against an unencumbered property owned by a senior citizen based on a fraudulent power of attorney, brokered by the man's financially desperate son, is a corporate nightmare. The threat of a public lawsuit, of regulatory investigations, of losing their license to operate is terrifying to them. They will do anything to make this go away quickly and quietly. And the notary? Brenda Little and her firm are in an even worse position. Notary fraud is a felony. We have evidence that she colluded with your daughter-in-law. Her professional insurance will not cover her for intentional criminal acts. She is facing the loss of her business, her license, and potentially her freedom. They are the weak points, Robert. They are the crumbling pillars supporting Ethan's entire scheme. By attacking them, we don't just seek to recover your money. We seek to make the entire fraudulent structure collapse in on itself, leaving Ethan with absolutely nothing. No loan, no legal authority, and no allies. It's cleaner, faster, and infinitely more effective. We let the corporations eat each other alive, and we walk away with the prize. When Ethan and Olivia walked into Evelyn Reed's conference room, they were radiating an aura of smug confidence. Ethan wore an expensive suit, and Olivia had a placid, sympathetic smile plastered on her face. They looked at me with a practiced pity, clearly believing this was a meeting where they, the responsible adults, would help manage their confused old father's finances. They took their seats, Ethan leaning back as if he owned the room, ready to take control of a situation he thought he had perfectly orchestrated. He was the puppet master, and I was just the puppet. Evelyn let the silence hang in the air for a moment before she moved. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a grand speech. She simply stood, picked up a file from her desk, a binder at least 4 inches thick, and placed it in the center of the polished conference table. It landed with a solid, heavy thud that seemed to shake the entire room. "This," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like glass, "is a courtesy copy of the lawsuit we are filing against Titan Financial for predatory lending and against the office of Brenda Little for notary fraud." The lawyer for Titan, a slick man in his 50s, visibly flinched. His eyes widened as he stared at the binder, which had my name and Titan's on the spine. The color drained from his face and from the face of the Titan executive beside him. They saw their careers, their bonuses, and their corporate reputation flashing before their eyes. The confident puppet masters had just looked up and seen the strings. "However," Evelyn continued, her voice dangerously quiet, "my client is a reasonable man. He is prepared to offer you a one-time, non-negotiable opportunity to avoid litigation and the public humiliation that will inevitably follow." She slid a single piece of paper across the table towards Titan's lawyer. "You will immediately cancel the $750,000 debt in its entirety. You will expunge all negative reporting from my client's credit history, and you will deliver a certified check to this office for $250,000 in damages. You have 24 hours to agree. Otherwise, we will see you in court." The Titan lawyer didn't even need to consult his client. He simply nodded, his face a mask of defeat. After they had signed the preliminary agreement and left, Evelyn turned her steely gaze to Ethan, who sat frozen in his chair, his face ashen. "As for you," she said, her voice dripping with ice, "your father has chosen not to press criminal charges. However, you are to have no further contact with him, ever. Your inheritance is gone. Now get out of my office." They stumbled out of the room without a word. That evening, I sat in my own living room in the quiet, peaceful silence. It was no longer the silence of loneliness. It was the sound of my life reclaimed. This entire ordeal, as painful as it was, taught me a profound and necessary lesson. I learned that unconditional love should not mean unconditional trust. Trust, like any structure, must be inspected and maintained, especially with those closest to us, because a flaw in that foundation is the most dangerous of all. I also rediscovered a part of myself I thought I had retired: the engineer. That logical, methodical, and data-driven mind was not just a memory of my career. It was the very toolset I needed for my survival. True strength, I now understand, isn't just about building bridges for others, but about having the courage to tear one down to protect your own foundation. What would you have done in my position? Let me know in the comments below.